Welcome back to #Fempire, the podcast where we dig into bold ideas, radical reimaginings, and the inspiring women who are reshaping the world in thoughtful, grounded ways. Today's guest is someone who will change the way you think about dirt. Yes, I said it, dirt. Destiny Allen Green is an environmental scientist, holds a master's degree in land and water systems, and is a proud Black Afro-Métis daughter of the Underground Railroad and the First Peoples of Turtle Island. She is a scientist by trade, an innovator by night, and a farmer by experience, but maybe not in the traditional way you might be picturing. Just as Destiny's ancestors tended to the lands of Turtle Island for generations, carrying their Indigenous wisdom across oceans, she too seeks to be in deep and respectful relationship with the land. With farming roots that stretch across both sides of her family, Destiny proudly identifies as a small-scale, unconventional farmer. Her mission is to help others discover the joys of everyday farming as a powerful way to reconnect with the land, with themselves, and with our shared stories. Destiny is the co-founder and owner of Farmers, the Future Agrarians Reciprocity Movement for Earth, Relationships, and Story. Together with her friend and fellow environmental scientist, Maya Summers, this powerful duo are developing programs that help people reconnect with the earth and reimagine what it means to be a farmer. They break down the myth that you need acres of land or a perfect garden bed to grow something and make a meaningful impact on the earth. Instead, they teach you how to shift your mindset, make your gardening reflect a piece of you and your history, and most importantly, embrace the simple, powerful act of getting your hands in the dirt to build a new kind of relationship with the land. In this episode, Destiny shares how tending to the land, even in urban settings, like on a windowsill or in a balcony planter, can shift our mindset from consumption to connection, from overwhelm to action. We talk about environmental justice, the impacts of climate change, the radical accessibility of gardening, and how small, consistent acts of care can become powerful expressions of environmental stewardship. This is a conversation about reclaiming our place in the natural world and remembering that healing the earth isn't about being perfect, it's about participating. So, let's get into it. So Destiny, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Julia. I'm happy to be here. Excited to chat. I love to talk all about farming and nature and all of those things. So I'm excited for our discussion here.
It's going to be a really insightful one and very different than some of the other conversations I've had on the podcast. So I'm really looking forward to it. And let's, dive right in. What first drew you to the relationship of humans and nature? And I want to point to you're a geologist by trade, but what inspired you to get into that and even take it further to have a master's in land and water systems?
Yeah, so I would say, like a lot of things in my life and often with others as well, it's been quite a journey. How I initially got into the field was way back in my high school days. When I was thinking about what I wanted to pursue next as I looked towards university, I got some advice from my mom, and she said, just think about the things that you really enjoyed, that you really found interesting in school. And what immediately sort of came to my mind was a geography course that I took. But geography and geology have quite a close connection. And so the connection between geology and geography stood out to me profoundly once I started taking my courses. And I just discovered, I think I should do both things. Thinking about it sort of in retrospect, where did this all come from? As a child, I was one who always just loved to play in the dirt. You could find me outside for hours digging in the dirt, looking for worms, making my own mud, adding water, all these sorts of things. So I think I was always sort of interested in that way. And I didn't necessarily think this will be my career. But here we are. So yeah, I would say that my fascination with the earth started very early. I also have quite a few farmers in my family going back several generations. So we've always had, I would say, a connection to the land from that regard as well. And then, yeah, studying geology and physical geography just gave me the opportunity to understand some of the Earth systems a little bit more deeply, understand why the world looks the way it does in terms of its physical nature. And being able to explain and understand those processes a little bit more was something that was always very fascinating to me. So that's how I got into geology. And then ultimately for my master's, which was in land and water systems, in choosing that, I would say I went down that path because I wanted to then see what the connection between all of these natural processes were. But then how do we fit into that? How do our decisions as humans impact those systems? How can we work together? What can we do to sort of work in tandem as opposed to perhaps fighting against each other in a lot of ways? So, yeah.
That's beautiful. And what's coming to mind too is I remember very fondly as a kid making like potions in the mud and stuff. So it's really cool that you were maybe able to look back at your childhood and see, well, where does this interest come from of working with your hands and playing in the mud? And it's really, I think, important and relevant now, part of the conversation of climate change. What is our relationship with the earth and how can we protect it? A lot of practices coming from Indigenous cultures that have been talking about this for years. And unfortunately, now we're slowly just starting to adapt to it. But I want to lean into the point, as a geologist, and you mentioned some of these themes, you're trained to read the Earth's layer kind of like a history book. And in your view, how do the stories written quite literally in the stone, soil, and water reflect the deep interdependence between people and the planet?
Hmm. So, yeah, I really, really like this question, and I could take it a bunch of different directions. But I think at the highest level, my training as a geologist and also my work in physical geography, I think it gives me the vantage point of seeing so many natural interdependencies between Earth processes. And naturally, as an extension of that, I see us as humans interacting with that. And I think that's just a natural outflowing of that. So, just to explain that a little bit more, you can think about almost anything in the natural world. And in order for it to look the way that it does currently, so many processes had to happen and so many things had to interconnect with each other in order to result in what you're seeing. And I think in remembering that, we can think about that as how we interact with the earth as well. Any decision that we're making, for instance, in our garden, what we choose to plant, those sorts of things, they have an impact on the surrounding ecosystem that you're living within. And so I think the study of geology is really something that's given me a bit of a lens into that. But there are so many things that when we look out into the natural world, we can see interdependencies. And I think we should be seeing ourselves in a similar way. We should not be looking at ourselves as disconnected from these systems that are happening around us. So I think as humans, we have a lot of influence on the land, and we should be thinking about how we can be responsible with that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, again, climate change, we're seeing icebergs melting and water levels rise. Other places, water levels are decreasing and there's droughts. So many things. And you point into the theme, and I want to lean into it a little bit more about your master's thesis. And you focused in on the intersection between policy, community, and social responsibility. Could you share and talk a little bit more about this crossroads?
So, yeah, when I was looking to do my master's, I was very interested in bringing in sort of that people component to the natural landscapes that I was learning about. I wanted to really understand, okay, now I know the process, but why does this matter? What does this mean for us? And that's what I was really looking for with the master's program that I ultimately decided to pursue. And so, yeah, like I was sort of saying, I think we should be seeing ourselves as connected to the land. We have such a huge influence on the land. And so I think it's really important for us to look for ways that we can be factoring in the land and the decisions that we're making. I think so many of our social issues that we are faced with have a natural land sort of component to them. It's related to the earth in one way or the other. And so it's important for us to be factoring in those systems, how they naturally work with the decisions that we're ultimately going to make. You mentioned that with climate change being so prevalent and obvious to us now. This obviously has real ramifications for us as people. It has ramifications for policy. It should influence what our governments are choosing to do. All of these things are interconnected. And so I think it's really time that we stop dissociating from the world around us. I think social responsibility can often be something that we pawn off on certain select individuals. And I think it's really important that we all begin to see ourselves as contributors, as someone who can do something. It may not be something large, it may not necessarily affect global change, but you don't know, it could. And the other thing, too, is that a multitude of small decisions that we make are meaningful. And together, that's where the impact comes. So, yeah, I think we all need to see ourselves as connected to the land. I think we all need to see ourselves being engaged in policy and social responsibility, in mindfulness, in the decisions that we're taking in order to be good stewards both of each other, but then also of the land.
You launched a new arm of the Empathy Agency Inc. called Farmers. Can you share with our listeners what Farmers stands for? And what was the goal of this branch within the broader work of the agency?
Yeah. So Farmers is an extremely long acronym. What it stands for is Future Agrarians Reciprocity Movement for Earth, Relationships, and Story. And like I said, it's a very long acronym, but this is very intentional. And that's because all of these words we really think are quite important in framing how we should be looking at the natural world. It sort of speaks to the different points I've already kind of raised around the fact that we should be seeing ourselves as connected and not disconnected from the land, and looking at, how are the decisions I'm making today going to influence the future, going to impact the people around me, all of those sorts of things. So, yes, Farmers is situated within the Empathy Agency. And the Empathy Agency is all about helping people to find hope, destination, and justice in all of their relationships. And Farmers is providing that lens for our relationship with the earth. So, just to explain the letters sort of briefly, I would say Future Agrarians, again, is sort of focusing us around that future minded approach. We want the decisions that we're making in regards to the land to be thinking about the next generation, several generations away from us as well. We don't want to be just making decisions that work solely for us now. And I think that the time scale, I suppose, of the earth, it's a lot longer than the amount of time that we each spend on the earth. And I think in having that future minded approach, we are sort of syncing ourselves as best we can to the rhythm, perhaps, that the earth has, which might seem slow for us. But I think that there's real value in being intentional and slow and, thoughtful about the things that we're doing. The A for agrarians is really just focused around that idea of planting, farming, that sort of work. And then reciprocity movement. This is sort of a refocusing around the idea of reciprocity. This is not meant to be something that is transactional. It's not meant to say, I'm doing this for you and therefore you must do X, Y, Z for me. This is about really just seeing all the gifts that exist around us, all of the many wonderful earth processes that are happening, and being grateful for those things. So the ability to grow a plant requires so many processes, so many underlying things need to be happening within the soil, within the atmosphere. You need to bring water into that. All of those things, if they're not working in tandem, your plant is not going to grow. And the fact that they do is a gift. And so we want to be sort of focusing our minds around that as well. And then reciprocity movement is referencing the fact that we're wanting people to move towards that idea of reciprocity. And why? For earth, relationships, and story. So we're doing this for the earth. We're doing this that we're making responsible decisions for caring for the land. And for relationships, we are referring to our relationship with the land, but then we're also referring to the relationships that we have with others. And so how are my decisions impacting those around me as well? And then for story. So Story is actually a little bit interesting. We went back and forth on whether or not story should be plural or singular in our acronym, and ultimately we landed on it being singular. And the reason for that is because we really want to be sort of focused in around the idea that we are a part of one collective story. It's one story that we all get to contribute towards. We all get to contribute towards the land, towards each other, and we should be working together. And so we thought story should be singular. So, yeah.
That was really beautiful, and I really see how thought out it was, and it makes sense when you put it all together. So, kudos to you for doing something so remarkable and thought out. And you did say we, so if you wouldn't mind, maybe also sharing with the listeners who your other co-founder is, and maybe what was that inspiration for the both of you working together to launch Farmers?
Yes, absolutely. So, my co-founder of Farmers is Maya Summers. Maya is one of my good friends. We met in university. We were both pursuing the same program. So she is also a geologist by trade, and also a physical geographer as well. So I would say that our love of the land is really what drew us together, but also drew Farmers sort of out of us as well. Maya and I, we've taken this on as a bit of a passion project. It was really birthed out of a desire to want to farm. One of our dreams is like we want to be able to grow lots of food and be in connection with the land. And we've sort of spent a long time thinking and talking about that. And we just started to think, how can we make this a reality in one version or another in our lives right now? Just given the circumstances that we both live within, we don't have access to a huge amount of land. We're not in any position to be buying, farmland, for instance. But we don't think that that should be a disqualification for the connection that comes from connecting in your garden, growing things, eating food that you've grown. All of those things we fully believe should not be out of reach for regular everyday people who may not have that access.
Yeah, for sure. And what's also coming to mind, both with the what farmer stands for and just to your responses is there seems to be this disconnect as well of understanding what goes into actually producing food. Like you said, it is a gift. You need the water, you need the sun. We're very fortunate to have, four seasons here in Canada, but it makes me think, like, is maybe that why it's easier to have food waste in Canada, both on an individual level, but also at the, more magnitude commercial level, because we don't see the person nurturing the land, picking the food, how much water goes into it. It breaks my heart sometimes, we all have that like old spinach or like salad box in the back of our fridge, and then we end up throwing it out, and it hurts me so much. And I grew up in Italian culture. My grandparents were farmers. It actually said on their visas to come to Canada that they were farmers. So I was always very exposed to respecting the land, respecting the animals. And this is also a misconception in Italian culture that we eat a lot of meat. If you actually go to Italy, it's opposite because they respect the animals, and it's very done humanely when it comes to actually slaughtering the animals. And it's the last resort sometimes. But my tangent here is I think it's great what you're doing. And going back to that inspiration behind launching Farmers, you mentioned it. It's part of your passion and that deep belief that everyone has the capacity to contribute, even in small ways. So, can you share more about where this belief comes from and why it's so central to your work? And maybe for those who are listening, what are some meaningful ways people can contribute on a small scale that creates that bigger, longer term impact? Because, yeah, you said it as well. We're living longer, so that means our carbon footprint is expanding. Unfortunately, we are pushing, and there's a bit more accountability at the industrial level to have companies do more sustainable packaging, more paper, all these things. We're slowly seeing that shift. But yeah, what can people do in their day to day that maybe makes them be more conscious of their choices?
I think I'll give a practical example, but I think I will preface it with, to me, I think our mindset is really the most important part. I think if we have a shift in our mindset that, starts to engage with the land with empathy and starts to consider the needs that exist around us, the needs of the land, etc. I think when we focus around that, a natural outpouring of that will be decisions that are more, quote, sustainable or more mindful of the other processes that are working around you. So I think a lot of the work of farmers is focused around that idea of building up a what we call farmer's mindset or a garden mindset, let's say, which is meant to influence all of the relationships you have with the natural land. So when we stop thinking about the land as, for instance, commodities, when we make that shift in thought process, naturally we're going to respond differently. Naturally, we're going to be more inclined not to be wasteful. Naturally, we're going to be thinking about our impact because we see what it actually means around us. So I think it kind of answers your question in part because it is something small that we can all do, is we can be considering what our mindset actually is. What posture do we have towards the land? And is that something that we need to change? And that's something we can do wherever we are at any time. So that's one thing. But to return back to something perhaps a little bit more practical as well, when you were talking, you mentioned the spinach that goes bad in the back of the fridge. I think we have all experienced that. It's nasty. But, when things start to go in my fridge and there's nothing I can do to redeem them, I'm thinking about how I can compost them, for instance. And you don't have to have a whole composting setup or anything like that, but just being mindful of the fact that there are nutrients and different minerals that are within these things that are rotting. And how can I return that back to the land? That's a small way. I think another small way is just thinking about like the amount of water that we use, for instance. Some people, when you're washing dishes, are you leaving the water on? Maybe we turn it off. There are very small things that we can do. And I think regardless of if you have a garden, what size it is, etc., there are all sorts of things that we can do. And when we start to see the earth and the land processes around us, any conscious decision we choose to make is a helpful one. So you might think, oh, if I use less water, what does that matter for my garden? But it does, because ultimately the water you need for your garden and the water you're using for your needs is the same water. It's all part of the same water cycle. We need to be responsible with that wherever we're using it. I think it really comes down to your mindset, seeing your connection to the land, seeing the processes that are happening around you, starting to understand those things and acting out of that place.
Absolutely, and very well said. And I totally agree with you, that mindset shift. And we are in affordability times and it's very difficult. Like, these are small changes, like even brushing your teeth, shutting the faucet off. I grew up in a very frugal household, so like our hands would get slapped if we didn't. So I didn't even know people did that. But like,
Yeah.
these are little things, like you said, washing the dishes. Another thing too, if you do have a garden, this was also something that was weird that I never understood people didn't do. But again, growing up Italian and the farmer mentality, like, have a rain barrel outside. So when it rains, catch that water. You're saving on your water bill. You don't have to actually like pull out the garden hose and water. It's good water. It's natural and you can use it for another day. But I also want to acknowledge, I really love that farmers invites people to come to the garden as a way of building community. And I think community's also been very central in a lot of my conversations on Fempire, is this distance. We're moving a little away from community because of social media and this individualism that's, I think, being pushed on us. But it's great to like get your hands dirty. And there's so much data to also show the reduce of anxiety and depression by literally just putting your hands in the soil, going out for a walk in a garden, like so many great benefits. And that's a wrap on this episode. But don't go too far. Destiny's just getting started. In part 2, she dives even deeper into how she's reclaiming the narrative around who gets to be a farmer. How the power of small, consistent actions can lead to bigger impacts, and why justice, empathy, and belonging are at the heart of her vision for co-founding Farmers. It's a powerful conversation you won't want to miss. So go ahead and hit play on part 2 now. We'll catch you there.